Well, hey, what's going on, college football fans? We're back. Another episode on a late Monday night here in California. We are recording, but that is Nathaniel Gilmore. I am Andrew Hudson. We are glad to bring you some more college football this week, starting it off with our teams that we know and love. And we'll go ahead and talk some Florida football right now, which, man, tough things to watch right now for Florida football. Just came off of a 49-17 loss against Texas. This game was just there was really no hope from the beginning. We had DJ Lagway warming up before the game, but there was really no hope of him playing coming off the hamstring injuries. So Aiden Warner out there just can't really get anything going on offense. At halftime, we were down 35-0, and it was just we had nothing. We had nothing. I coming into the second half, I didn't even really watch. I just kind of checked in on the score every once in a while. Although the one thing I did wait and watch for was for us to score our first points. Because if you know, and if you watch the broadcast at all, you heard it 1,000 times that Florida has the longest streak without getting shut out in a game. 456 games going back to 1988, which is impressive. But they just shoved it down your throat over and over and over. I was like, okay, we get it. You don't have to keep mentioning it. Finally, we were able to drive down in the third quarter and kick a field goal. Of course, we scored two more touchdowns after that, but I kind of stopped watching, just looked at the box score and whatever afterwards. But everyone was questioning Quinn Ewers. He's back. Over 300 yards, 5 touchdowns. Um, their team just they look like they're supposed to look against an undermanned Florida team. So that's, last week we took on a top five team in Georgia and really held our own and just fell apart late in the game. And this week, just without DJ Lagway, there wasn't really a chance for us. So glad they fought hard. They were able to put 17 points on the board, of course, with backups in later in the game, but a loss, another loss to put on the record books. And now we're looking forward to this week where we're taking on LSU, an LSU team that, of course, just got beat down by Alabama at home, which is a bad look. But Alabama, of course, is one of the best teams in the country, and a lot of things are going to be coming down to the health of DJ Lagway. I don't have much hope for him playing. Again, we said this was a hamstring injury that you, as the athletic trainer, Nathaniel, certainly know a lot about, but they take a while to get back from. If you
Yeah.
put someone in too quickly after a hamstring, it really brings the possibility of further injury. So with the situation where we are now, and with the news coming out last week where Scott Strickland, the Florida AD, said, we're bringing Billy back for another year. Billy Napier will be coaching at least one more year at Florida. I think that gives him the comfort to be able to sit back and say, okay, I don't need to put DJ in. I don't need to be scrapping for wins to save my job. We can just kind of get ourselves to the best place for next year. So I would assume that Aiden Warner would start again. We have another quarterback that had some starts at Colorado State in the past. I don't know why he is not getting any playing time. Maybe he will this week, but yeah, we have two straight games at home now against LSU and Ole Miss, two, very good teams in the SEC. But being at the Swamp at least gives some comfort, but I really don't have uh, much thought towards us winning these games. But as always, I'm gonna watch it. I'm gonna watch it. I'm gonna enjoy it because you get 12 games a year
Yep.
to watch your team. So we're gonna watch it as much as we can. But that's what's happening with
Yeah.
the Gators. Hopefully we can turn something around, but that's where we're at.
Yeah, you just need a sneak a win against LSU or Ole Miss, and then what, Florida State at the end of the year? That's a bowl game right there. That'll be a really interesting game. Um, but yeah.
Yeah, honestly, it's tough with just with our quarterback situation. I want to say we'll beat Florida State because they're absolutely terrible,
It's so
but you just
bad.
don't know. Like our whole team looks different without DJ Lagway or Graham Mertz. So we'll see. That'll be interesting to watch. But I know USC is coming off of a bye, heading into a new week. What do we got coming up?
Man, I mean, first of all, we were talking about this off air. Sadly, John Robinson, old USC football coach, one of the
Hmm.
greatest USC football coaches in history, died earlier today. Actually, there's just complications from pneumonia. He was, yeah, like I said before, one of I think he was 104 and 35 at USC, and he had two
Hmm.
tenures here. Really helped USC kind of from some dark ages, kind of pull them back up. But yeah, just thoughts and prayers to him and his family. And yeah, it was a big blow. But yeah, moving on from that, we actually mentioned him in our trivia a couple weeks ago.
Just a couple weeks ago, yeah, we
I
were
think it was
talking about
what,
him. So
yeah, good coach. I know a lot of people respected him and seems like a really good dude.
mhm.
He cared and had a lot of passion. And I mean, I wasn't alive yet to kind of watch him when he was coaching at USC or the Rams, but yeah, everyone that knew him spoke so highly of him. So yeah, moving on to another sad topic, the state of USC's season right now. 4-5, not much to go. We talked about a little bit last week. Jayden Maiava, kind of, he's going to be our starting quarterback now. Moss already being linked to Michigan, so we'll kind of see how that plays out. But yeah, I mean, right now the whole thing is let's see what the young guys can do. Let's see what we have in Maiava. I don't think Miller Moss is going to stay, and I think right now Lincoln Riley is trying to figure out is Maiava a suitable quarterback to keep next year. He's definitely going to go into the portal. I think that was one thing where he kind of sat back at the portal after Miller Moss threw what 6 touchdowns in the against Louisville. Those are such great days. I remember it just like yesterday. Um, yeah, playing Nebraska this week. I remember talking to my parents like a month ago, maybe 2 months ago. This is before I got back to California, and it was a lot of, oh man, like, are we going to get tickets to the Nebraska game? Nebraska's on top of the world. USC is running through teams, and yeah, we thought this was going to be an insane matchup. But now Nebraska's 5-4. They've had some struggles recently. They got blown out by Indiana, who's been beating a lot of good teams. They lost against Ohio State in a close one where you're like, okay, I can kind of see that. And then they just lost to UCLA, which is probably the most indefensible loss out of that streak. Just because UCLA just has not been a good team. They've had a solid defense and okay offense that can move the ball, but Dylan Raiola has not looked like the same quarterback that he did at the beginning. I think he just needs to, figure out how to play fundamentally sound football. He is just running around trying to, throw off his back foot, do all these crazy things. So, I mean, I think USC has a good chance at winning this. We had a bye week. A lot of our defense is rested. We get a couple guys back on that end. I think this new offense USC is going to trot out. I think it's going to be a lot more run heavy just because Maiava is, really good at running the ball, able to make plays with his feet. And he's kind of like the opposite of Miller Moss, where he's wild, chucks the ball deep, and he can run, where Miller Moss was very, you know, plays on schedule, makes the right reads. He's not really trying to rip it at any given point. But yeah, so we'll see how that does against a really good Nebraska run defense. But yeah, hopefully, like you said, I'm gonna watch. I'm not too certain. This is at home. We've actually won games at home this year. We still have yet to win our first road game.
Yeah.
So it's a good shot. The chips are falling our way, as they say.
Yeah, it's helpful in that way. And Nebraska themselves just 1-2 on the road and currently on a 3-game losing streak. So hopefully you can catch them at a good point. But
Yeah,
yeah, looking at Raiola, he's got those natural gifts, but you can tell the decision making is still,
yeah,
I mean, as a freshman,
yeah. He's
he's
a
got a
freshman,
long way to go. So he's
Yeah,
got time, of course, to figure those things out. Hopefully for USC, he just hasn't figured them out yet and can
yeah,
get a good win here and get you guys back into bowl eligibility.
yeah. You know what? I will say, Nebraska. We have UCLA, which I don't think they're a great team. And then we have a Notre Dame team, which, if our offense is clicking by that game, I think that's a good game. And it's so
Um,
hard watching these losses because we're not getting blown out. We're not, getting dominated in, I want to say, I'll say all of them. All the games I felt like we were, the slightly better team, or just it was an even matched game, and it's just rough. So it's weird because like I have that hope where it's like, you know what, like we're such a good team, we just nothing's clicking. But then it's also like, how do you explain 5 losses? So
right.
bowl game maybe, hopefully. We'll see. Maybe they'll give us some hope in the Holiday Bowl 2 years in a row. See what happens.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll have to see. But both of our teams fighting to get into bowl eligibility, move and on second or third quarterbacks at this time. So we'll see you the rest of the way with our UF and USC brethren. But let's move on to the biggest games of the week because we had some huge ones. And we've got to start with one in the SEC, Georgia and Ole Miss. Ole Miss just taking it to Georgia,
Yeah,
winning 28-10. Really, I mean, they've swapped seats. Ole Miss is out there playing the way Georgia is supposed to look. Their defense is suffocating. The guys
yeah,
that they had 5 sacks on the day, 9 tackles for loss. My man Princely Ellen, the former Gator, with 2 sacks himself, and they forced 3 turnovers on the day. Again, Carson Beck has continued to struggle, not playing very well at all, and Jackson Dart fighting through injury
man.
was able to pull them to a victory. How about Austin Simmons coming through too? He comes in fresh off the bench, leads them straight down the field, including a fourth down
Yeah,
completion
that was
that he
big.
had on that drive. They went right down, had a rushing touchdown, and man, it was a sloppy game. It was rainy the whole time, but there wasn't a second that didn't seem like Ole Miss was in control.
Yeah, I think maybe the first 2 drives, it kind of felt like it was falling apart. I was watching. So I have lots of love for Jackson Dart and Lane Kiffin, both former Trojans. Um, but they just seem to fall apart in big games. That was kind of the
Yeah,
narrative being painted. And I mean, I remember last year watching this hyped Ole Miss team going into Georgia, and like they're going to be the team to kind of knock Georgia off. Because at that point, they're still trying to three-peat. And Jackson Dart just kept getting hit, and Georgia ran through them. And, that narrative's just running through your mind where, okay, last time they, came up against this Georgia team, they just folded at the first chance. And then we saw 3 straight plays to start off the game. One, you know, no gain, no yardage at all. Second, he got sacked and it looked bad. I remember watching, I was like, ooh, like 2 guys just kind of laying on him. And that's where he, rolled his ankle. And the third one, you could tell he couldn't put any pressure on that ankle. So he just kind of lobbed it as he was getting hit. It got picked and they went down and scored. And I was kind of sitting there like, I think that might be it. You just lost your quarterback. You're the narrative's happening all over again, especially when they got that 4th and goal where it's like, okay, you can stop them on 4th and goal, and this everything resets. You can kind of get a relief, but putting in Austin Simmons, which I mean, I think that guy is going to be the quarterback of their future. They've been pulling in a lot of portal guys like Matt Corral. and then Jackson Dart, obviously. But then I think Austin Simmons, man, he looked. I mean, it was 6 passes, but
Oof.
he had one
Yeah.
bad pass, but he just let him down the field, just calmed everyone down, and then Ole Miss's defense got to work, and then Jackson Dart, like you're saying earlier, the grit, like that's what I love seeing at USC. Like when he played against Washington State, or when he was a freshman, he was just out there balling against all odds.
Hmm.
And that's what he did here. He was, when he had time, he let it rip. And when he didn't, he ran. Like you could tell he was almost limping half those times, and
Yeah.
he was their leading rusher. So I mean, impressive performance by Ole Miss. I mean, I think, the sky's the limit. Their ceiling, I don't know what it is with all this parity happening. I think they have a shot if they can get everything together each week. They have a shot at, making it to the national championship.
Yeah. Absolutely. If their defense is playing this way, they certainly have a shot. There was another top five upset that went on this week. Miami, who's been flirting with death week after week, finally lost to Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech got that win we've all been clamoring for. We've talked about them potentially upsetting teams. They finally got Haynes King back from injury. They were going back and forth with him and Aaron Philo. But Georgia Tech, it would pull out the victory 28-23. I actually watched a good amount of the end of this game because I flipped over because Florida was
Hmm.
done. I was not watching that anymore. So I tuned in to the Miami and Georgia Tech matchup, and it was so interesting to see what was going on because the Miami defense was got a few stops there at the end of the game after Georgia Tech scored a touchdown to go 28-16. Then uh, Miami took the ball, drove down the field, but turned it over on downs. But then they made Georgia Tech go three and out,
Yeah, that
gave
was
them
big.
another chance, and they were able to drive down the field and get a touchdown. And then just 6 plays and a punt for Georgia Tech. And Cam Ward had his Heisman moment sitting
Yep.
there for him.
Yep.
2 minutes left, down by five, drive down the field, get yourself a touchdown, lock up the Heisman right there. I mean, it's over if he has this. Incomplete pass, sack fumble, game over. And it just felt like the air went out of
Yeah.
all of Hurricane Nation. And
Yeah.
they lose the game. Of course, they still have a chance at their conference championship. They still have a chance at the playoff, whatever, all those things. But the magical run it has stopped at this point, and I don't know what'll happen over the next few games. But man, what do you take from that loss?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it all year. It was Miami keeps flirting with these losses. They're down constantly. It's funny because my dad hopped in and was watching it because me and my brother were watching the game, and he was like, "Wow, like Miami's good this year." I'm like, "Yeah, yeah." He knows. We've talked about Mario Cristobal. He knows he's not. He knows my thoughts on Cristobal before this year, and he's like,
Right.
"Oh, Georgia Tech's like winning. Like, what's happening?" I just looked at him and I'm like, "Dad, this Miami team was down 25 to Cal. Like, this is they were down by like 3 at that point, or 4 points, and like this is nothing.
Yeah.
Like, they're gonna come back." And I mean, it's so hard because it just reminds me so much of 2022 USC team, where it's just everything's just on the back of the quarterback. And I mean, I will be honest, Miami's defense showed up in that first half, and it was just, banging ahead against the wall for Miami's offense, where it's like you can see that they know they can score easily, but it's just okay, like they're just playing with their food all throughout the first half. And then the second half, you're like, okay, like let's start to like, get this going. And then, they didn't get all these fourth downs that they normally get. I think they're over 50% on the year, and they went 1 for 4 this game, and I think that did them in. And I was laughing at the end of that game because I mean they were easily scoring. Like once, they started getting the offense into gear, once they kind of Restrepo wasn't doing great, but I forgot their second wide receiver was just having one heck of a game and just up and down the field, seven play touchdown type thing. And then when they called that timeout at the 2 minute warning,
Yeah.
I was laughing because I just heard, I just knew you're gonna bring it up, like talking about situational, awareness, especially at the end of that
Yeah.
the Georgia Tech drive where if they
Yeah.
had one more timeout, but it didn't matter because they got that end around to get the first down and kill it on third down. But if they stopped them on third down and they didn't have that last timeout, yeah. But
Well, and
yeah, I
it
think
brings it back to last year. It was the dumb decision of not taking a knee against Georgia Tech
yeah,
that led them to lose that
yeah,
game. So, yeah, they ended up giving up the first down anyway, but still, the bad decisions were there
it's
at
just so
times.
funny, just so
Yeah.
funny. Yeah, but I mean, yeah, like you're saying, Miami has everything to play for, but Miami SMU in the ACC championship game, I think that will be just a barn burner if Miami decides to
Yeah.
turn it on from the get-go.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That'll be a really interesting game. And we'll take it from the ACC. And we're going to talk about the implications of all these games in a minute, but let's talk about a couple more quickly. BYU Utah, the Holy War was back, and we've just got to take it to the end of the game just to start off. They Utah scored all their points in the second quarter. BYU chipped away, and it came down to the end. BYU gets the ball deep in their own territory. They get to fourth down. Utah makes the play. They sack him. Game over, right? No. Defensive holding on a corner, holding a wide receiver. First down, BYU drives down the field and ends up scoring to win. Nathaniel, should it have been called?
I don't know. I just look, it's like rewatching that play over and over again. Like they do all the zoom in and stuff. It's so blurry. Like, yeah, like, okay, the first 5 yards, it's fine. You're allowed
Right.
to kind of, play with the hands. And that's where most of the contact was because he tried going inside and then he tried bouncing it out, but his hand was there and then he let go. And then as they kind of got together, his shoulder dipped, but was it to try to get past him or was it him pulling his shoulder down? That
Yep.
shoulder dip is definitely what caused the flag, but they had a slow-mo at the time or like a side by side, same time thing looking at the quarterback. Like he was getting sacked when, that pull
Yes.
happened. So
As it was happening. Yeah.
should it have been called? I don't think so. That's far more like worse things have happened on that football field. Probably that play that didn't get called. Throughout that entire game, there were definitely plays that were worse that could have been called that weren't. So it's tough to see. Like, obviously, Utah, you're at home. The play before they called the timeout, but the whistle didn't really sound, and then they
Yeah.
sacked him in the end zone, or he just threw it out of bounds, or what. It was
Yeah.
weird. So they thought they won, and they're like, "No, we actually called timeout," even though no one knew that they called timeout. Then they go down, they get sacked, but no, there's a flag. I, I was rooting for Utah just because of the pick'ems, but yeah, I don't think it should be called.
No, it seemed like it was something that would be a play on situation. And
Yeah.
but of course, I'm not pushing any conspiracy theories, but like hey, we gotta keep BYU undefeated in this situation, give them another chance.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, especially
just
with the
crazy.
yeah, especially with the Big 12 not looking too hot.
I know,
Or I
I
guess
know.
no,
So
they're
having that hope there.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, especially with a lot of their teams kind of dropping down. They're like, we need a good team up there.
Yeah. Shout out to our conference champion, Oklahoma State, 0-7 in the conference this year. But we'll move
So
on. We
bad.
don't need to talk about that. Anyways, our last game we want to highlight, and we'll get through this quick, but Alabama, as we mentioned before, just completely manhandled LSU. And I will say, in the picks last week, I said I think this is a week Jalen Milroe will go off running the ball. I could see him going for 100 plus. He went for 185 and 4 rushing touchdowns. I mean, this guy is a freak of nature. The way he moves out there, the way he makes crazy plays. He had a 72-yard touchdown run. We saw the mistake-prone play of Garrett Nussmeier once again with 2 interceptions of his own. LSU just looked outclassed in this game.
Oh, so bad. I mean, I knew it was over once it hit 14-3. Honestly, 7-3,
Mm,
where Alabama's just so effortless. Like we're talking about Miami, so effortlessly just moved down the field and scored. And you kind of saw, oh, Jalen Milroe, they had some designed runs that actually worked. And you're like, oh, this might be a long day. Because right off the gate, if you can't stop Jalen Milroe, which, I mean, it just felt like they just decided to run him more this game. Like instead of just
yeah.
letting him step back and launch it, try to get it to, Ryan Williams deep, where they just had a lot more short passes, had more just Jalen Milroe. We're gonna move linemen to help you run. And I mean, once it got 7-3, I was like, oh, that's bad. 14-3, I'm like, I don't want to say it's over after the first quarter, but it felt over.
Yeah, and they need to do that. They need to take
Yeah.
advantage of his running ability, or else they're not getting the dual threat that they really need to take advantage of. Because this is
Yeah.
obviously a good LSU team that they destroyed. So if he truly is running like that, that's that's the thing with Alabama, where they can be anyone at their
Yeah.
peak. It just comes down
They
to how
have,
he's actually going to play.
yeah, you have to be at that peak. You can't
Right.
have dips like against Vandy. You can't have dips like you had against Tennessee. You have to consistently play at that level if you want to be a great team.
Well, and that's where we get to the playoffs, where if you're not a conference championship, you got to win 3 games in a row against elite competition, and you've got to be consistent every week. So that brings us to a little conversation now. After these upsets that have happened, where the conferences lie, what does our playoff picture look like? And what is even for these teams that lost, what are we looking at? So right now in the ACC, we've got SMU undefeated and Clemson and Miami with 1 loss apiece. And actually, Miami has dropped to third in the ACC rankings. BYU is still the only undefeated team in the Big 12 with Colorado right behind them. We talked about last week. Indiana and Oregon are 2 undefeateds in the Big 10, of course, with the other 1 losses right behind them. Then jumping down to the SEC, no undefeated teams anymore, but we've got 3 teams: Tennessee, Texas A&M, and Texas, all with 1 loss, and then Georgia, Ole Miss, Alabama, Missouri, and LSU, all with 2 losses. I mean, the shakeups are here for the taking. And of course, there are still teams that are going to play against each other. Man, what are the biggest things that stand out with what's going to happen in these conference championship games, and who still has a chance at making it into the playoff?
Yeah, I think it's just funny just looking at just the madness that is the SEC right now. We're talking about it off air.
Yeah.
That's what, nine teams that are all ranked. I
Oof.
saw something. The only thing that needed to happen was I think LSU winning or something like that, where just almost the entire conference would be 10-2. Then it's like, who do you let in at that point? And I mean, the
Yeah.
same thing here with a lot of these teams, which a lot of them don't play each other. They can all, have realistic shots at winning out. Who do you leave out? Because only two can play for the championship. So you assume those two teams automatically get in. Um, do you leave out a two-loss Georgia? Do you leave out a two-loss Ole Miss who beat Georgia? Do you leave out a two-loss Alabama? And it's going to be interesting where do you how are they going to kind of manage how many SEC teams are we going to let in? Are we going to let just 3 or 4 in? Or are we just going to say, all right, you know what? Independent, we're hoping Notre Dame loses, so we get another one in. We're going to
Hmm.
only let one ACC team in. We're only going to let two Big Ten, 3 Big Ten teams, which realistically, if Indiana loses twice, um, you can see in Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State's probably going to be looking on the outside in, but they are number 4 in the AP and pretty high up in the CFP too. So it's a lot of confusion. A couple, there's going to be some games to kind of make it a little clearer, but I mean, it's crazy how all these conferences are just a mess right now.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And looking at these matchups for the rest of the season, Indiana still has to play Ohio State this week.
Yeah, yeah,
And so huge matchup coming in the Big Ten where, of course, if Indiana loses, they're drop down and we'll see what the tiebreakers are. If they win, Ohio State is Ohio State has
yeah,
two
they're out.
losses and could probably be totally out of the situation. Oregon only has Wisconsin and Washington left, which we would expect them to take care of both of those teams.
Yeah.
Penn State, looking at it, has Purdue, Minnesota, and Maryland, where again we would imagine they would take care of those games, but we don't know. Maybe there is a loss to come. So potentially could have, if Ohio State beats Indiana, we would have Indiana, Ohio State, Oregon, and Penn State all with one loss. And they've got to figure out what to do there with
Yeah,
that situation.
I think kind of looking at tiebreakers, I'm pretty sure. So if Oregon wins out and Ohio State beats Indiana, it's going to be Oregon, Ohio State, just because
Mm,
Ohio State has tiebreakers over Penn State and Indiana.
yeah,
But I mean, if Indiana wins out, they're in. I don't think there's a way unless both Ohio S- if Ohio State loses again, and I think Indiana has to lose a game outside of Ohio State for Penn State
mm,
to even have a shot at the tiebreakers,
yeah,
just because they don't play Indiana and they already lost to Ohio State. So I think
yeah,
Oregon, unless they lose their last two, they're already in. Indiana has to Indiana just has to beat Ohio State and they're in.
yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And that Oregon is still undefeated, so they're straight in, of course, if they win their last two, and then it's going to come down to this week, Indiana, Ohio State, and the winner is all but going to secure their spot in the conference championship game. Then looking quickly at the ACC, we've got SMU undefeated with Boston College, Virginia, and Cal coming up, all winnable games, and then Clemson with a game against number 18 Pitt this week, which that's an interesting matchup. Two ranked teams. I'm not sure what's going to happen. Then a throwaway game against the Citadel and a very, very losable game against South Carolina. And we've already talked
Carolina.
before about Miami having no more ranked teams on their schedule. So, with that in mind, Miami certainly has a chance to jump back up into that number 2 spot with Clemson having two tough games with Pittsburgh or with Pitt and South Carolina still to come. But they're in a race and then just kind of hoping to be able to make their way back into the conference championship game. But do you think an 11-1 Miami team that doesn't play in the ACC championship is in?
No, I think ACC.
Ooh.
I don't know the tiebreakers exact, especially because Miami. I think the only reason they're 3 and Clemson is 2 is just because they've played one less game. Because Clemson does have that South Carolina game at the end of the year. I just I think if Miami wins out, I'm pretty sure they get into the championship. I'm not.
Hmm.
That's what I kind of got the vibes from the commentators when they're talking about the tiebreakers. But I mean, it's tough. I think no one thought SMU was going to be here. They're just throwing
Yeah.
a wrench into everything. I mean, they've looked so good, and if they, I mean, obviously they win out, they're going to be in the ACC championship, and it's Miami and Clemson duking it out, who they don't play each other, which is one of the big drawbacks of these expanded conferences. Yeah, there's a lot more competition. Penn State's not playing, not Penn State, Iowa's not playing, the bad half of the Big Ten every year. But
Yeah.
I mean, you get these situations where they don't play each other. So now you're looking at these tiebreakers where you're gonna, someone's gonna get hurt. Someone, is gonna have a Florida State type moment last year where they did what they needed to do, but rules and
Yeah.
lettering of the law kick someone out. So, and I can't see the playoffs taking three, especially like we're talking about with if the SEC keeps going, it's going to be hard to put, the number three ACC team over an Alabama, over an Ole Miss, over
Yeah.
a Georgia, over even Texas A&M if they went out.
All right. Well, that's the thing. Yeah. The loser of the ACC championship game will for sure be out. And then from there, that if it's a one-loss team that's left on the outside, yeah, probably not them going
Yeah,
to be
I mean
making
it's a
it
toss
either.
up, and it doesn't help that Miami does not play a ranked team all year.
Yeah. Yeah. Their resume does not look as good, certainly as especially SEC teams that are going to be vying for that spot as well.
Yeah.
But so many questions. We have the CFP poll coming out tomorrow. We're recording this on Monday night. So we're going to talk a bit about risers and fallers in the AP poll in just a minute. But let's take a pause there and hit a trivia question. It's time. Nathaniel's got one for me this week. Play along like always, but let's hear. What do we got? I heard you were debating different trivia questions. So what do we have this week?
So I went deep. I was telling you about, I was looking through a lot of Heisman stuff,
Sure.
we're talking
Love it.
about so like the Heisman race is just up in the air this year. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to look at precedents, look at, two-way players. So I looked at a lot of Heisman stuff. And
Okay.
so with Shadur, he is he's projected to go one in almost every single mock draft I've seen,
Mm,
but he's not up there in Heisman voting. So what if we switched it? What if we got Heisman Trophy winners that weren't number one picks? So I'll give you an option.
okay.
There has been seven since yeah, let me make sure that's right. One, two, three, four, five. Yeah, seven since 2010. Seven Heisman winners that weren't number one picks, or
Okay.
15 Heisman winners that haven't been number one picks since 2000. So do you want to
Okay.
do all 2000 or do you just want to cut off at 2010?
Let's just try it. Let's just go for it.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. Let's try the fifth. I'll just try and go fast, as fast as I can, and we'll see. Um, okay, so 15 since 2000 have not been the number one overall pick.
Yep,
All right.
15 Heisman Trophy winners.
So do we count your boy Reggie Bush? Does he get his
Should
Heisman?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
He
yeah, he's
should
in
have
there.
been the number one pick, but the Texans went with Mario Williams. That's another discussion.
They told him during the draft process, we're taking you. So he did not have an
He
interview
didn't talk
with
to anyone.
any other team, and they didn't take him.
Crazy. Crazy.
So yes, Reggie Bush is one. 2005, he was the second overall pick.
Yeah, Matt Leinart won a Heisman,
Yes, he did.
right? And he was not a number one pick.
He was
Um,
not. He was the number 10 pick from 2004. Or I guess
Arizona.
2005, yeah.
Then let's just say Tebow,
Yep.
uh, Troy Smith was
Mm-hmm.
six. Um, After Tim, well, yeah, we can go with the running backs if we want. Mark Ingram,
Mm-hmm.
Derrick Henry. Let's just say Devontae Smith. I'll throw that out there.
Yeah.
Um, um, well, Marcus Mariota went number two behind Jameis.
Mm-hmm.
We have Johnny Manziel,
Yes,
2012.
sir.
Cam was in 11. He was number one. 12, 13. Who was Lamar Jackson,
There you
who
go. Last pick of the first round.
The Jaguars could have taken at the end of the first round, but we didn't. Oh, we took Taven Bryan instead. Anyways, anyways, that's fine. Um, let's see. How many do I have now?
You have 10. So
10.
five more to go.
Okay, well, what about uh Oklahoma quarterback White?
Jason White, he
Jason
went
White, yeah.
undrafted.
Wow. That is wild. That's why I just said his last name. Oh, that's funny. Let's go. Yeah, back there. I'm trying to pull back there some more, but 2013 was Jameis. He was number one. 14
hmm
was Der or 14 or 15 was Derrick Henry. 16, 17. Mm. Uh, Robert Griffin III went behind
Yes, sir.
Andrew
That
Luck.
was, yes, he did.
Um, that
All right.
was right between Cam and Johnny Manziel.
All right. So we have three
Oh,
left.
oh no, he
Oh,
was number one. I was thinking Sam Bradford, but he went number one.
yeah, he went one. So the three are at the edges of our timeline.
Okay, I've got to think recent. We just had Jayden Daniels went number two
Yeah.
behind Caleb Williams.
Yeah, we had two Heisman winners in one draft.
Yeah, and now do we have another recent?
So the last two are the first 2 years of of our timeline.
Yeah, so we're looking 2000 and 2001.
Yep.
Oh man, is Ron
So
Dane there?
no. The
He's 90,
first,
maybe 99. Uh-huh.
yeah, the first one, he played in the state of Florida. He was a quarterback.
Oh, Chris Winkie.
Yep.
Yeah. And then 01. Give me another clue like that, something.
So he was a Nebraska quarterback slash wide receiver. I honestly do
Yep.
not know much about him at all.
No, I should. My mind goes to Tommy Frazier, but he was back in the 90s.
Yeah, yeah.
Initials?
EC.
Um, oh, Eric
I
Crouch.
well,
Eric Crouch.
yeah,
Yeah,
there
yeah.
we go. There we go. I was gonna give you a hint that I wasn't 100% sure on. I think I was gonna say he was on he got drafted by the Browns or he was on
Are you
the
thinking of Tim
Browns.
Couch?
Oh, there we go. That's who I was
Yeah.
thinking of.
Tim
I just
Couch,
think
Eric Crouch, same guy.
who cares? I was just thinking of the Browns jersey that they have like
Yeah,
the one name
they
and they
change
keep
it.
taping over. And the first
Yeah,
one
that's
was, I
funny.
guess, Couch, not Crouch, but yeah.
Wow, 15. That means what we've got since 23, so 24, like nine who did go number
Nine.
one overall,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
honestly is probably the easier question. Um,
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, it was easier and then there was less. So I'm like, okay, you could probably nail these pretty. And I mean, they're like the easy ones. So yeah,
no,
I
that's
thought,
good.
I know you're a big draft guy. You pull
Sure.
random Jacksonville Jaguar draft picks from 2017, and I'm like, he's probably got this.
Well, draft and Heisman, those are two of my favorites. So I love that trivia question. Good stuff. Well, hey, let's move on. I hope you guys were able to get all 15. Okay. Maybe you're sitting there going, "You idiot, it's Eric Crouch. Come on." Okay, well, that's okay. But let's move on back to our top 25. We're gonna get some risers and fallers, and there are certainly good options for us to choose from. So, Nathaniel, go first. Who's your biggest riser from this past week?
Yeah, I think it's, looking at the AP poll right now, there's, a lot of teams that jumped up just because whether there's upsets, But I'm gonna go with a team that I think they jumped up the most, I want to say. But honestly, also in my point of view, in my mind, I think they really proved themselves this week. And we talked about them a lot. It's Ole Miss. I think Ole Miss in the minds of just everyone that watched that football game, it wasn't, oh man, like Georgia, they struggled. But we saw that same Georgia team just shut down Texas. We see that same Georgia team take out the first quarter of the Alabama game. They run through Alabama. And I mean, just watching Ole Miss dominate at, the line of scrimmage, um, Jackson Dart, just the most grit. I mean, that's what happens when you have a dual threat quarterback that just has that toughness and has experience. We talk about experience a lot. This is where it matters. He came back in. He said, I'm not going to let a freshman take my job. And on one leg, he willed the team to victory. And they just looked so good. And I mean, I said it earlier. I think if this team like just plays at the highest of their potential, there's not a lot of teams I'm looking on this list that can beat them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure. They have to meet that potential. And we've talked about Lane Kiffin, Ole Miss kind of folding in big games, but they have the chance, certainly here at this point in the season. My biggest riser is another team we've talked about. It's going to be Indiana right now. They, of course, were already high in the rankings, but have jumped up to number 5 in the AP poll. And this is a team that has not played. None of their opponents so far this year are ranked currently. So they don't have any huge wins. But this past week against Michigan was their toughest test thus far. Of course, not as good as they've been last year in their championship year, but Michigan still has the DNA. They're a tough defensive team, and Indiana out toughed them.
Yeah.
Came away with a 20-15 win. They've gotten themselves to 10-0 on the season, which is amazing. And they've got their biggest test coming up next week. Ohio State playing in Ohio State. And man, what a matchup that's going to be. But their perception with other people, how Signetti has them playing, and everyone talking about them, and everyone wants to talk about Indiana right now. And they're really going to be put to the test next week against the Buckeyes. But I've got them as my biggest riser. Just they've continued to impress me week after week after week with all these wins, and I I hope they can win this week against Ohio State. I'll say it
That would be
secretly.
so much fun. So much
Oh,
fun.
that'd be awesome to see. But on the flip side, my biggest faller, we talked about this a little bit beforehand. I think I'm going to do mine in pairs. And you can stick with the same pair with me if you want. If not, that's fine too. But it's going to be combined Georgia and Miami. All right. Both these teams were sitting there at the top 5, sitting pretty. All they've got to do is just keep winning and they're good. Both of them lose. Both of them drop right near the edge of the playoff bubble, and they're in danger right now. Looking at what they have coming up, like we said, Miami doesn't have many tests. I mean, they have 2 games left, not really a test, but every game has been a test for them really this season. And Georgia's playing Tennessee this week. Tennessee, and then they're playing Georgia Tech as well, which we've already seen beat good teams. So Georgia, Georgia could absolutely have a third loss, and at that point, they're out. They are
Yeah.
done.
Yeah.
And Miami is flirting with being out as well. These are 2 teams that we were talking about being, in the top 4, getting a bye potentially before last week, and they are eerily close to being out of the playoff picture. So those are my biggest followers for this week. What about you?
Yeah, I'm just gonna go with the other pair we talked about. Iowa State and Pittsburgh. I mean, what, 2, 3 weeks ago, if they had a bye, both of these teams were undefeated. They both
Both
had
undefeated.
Cinderella stories where
Ugh.
Iowa State, it was Matt Campbell just pulling yet another hat out of the hat, whatever the rabbit out of the hat, whatever that saying is. But just pulling another one out. And it just seemed like every 3 years he just pulls out some type of just a good team. And this was going to be the best of them all because they were undefeated. They were winning big games. And I mean, we take a look, 2 weeks later, both of these teams, Pittsburgh as well. Pittsburgh had a little bit of an easier path. They were winning games that, I mean, they were close head to head, and they just folded the last couple weeks. But I think Iowa State was the big disappointment where they're supposed to be, a potential Big 12, you know, playoff team. That was, with the Big 12 all up in array. Now it's Colorado. Now it's all these other teams coming up. Now it's BYU.
Yeah.
But yeah, Iowa State, Pittsburgh, Cinderella stories that just dropped out of the radar.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you brought it to my attention. I didn't realize both of those were outside of the top 25 after being undefeated
Yeah.
just a couple weeks ago, and that takes them pretty much out of our thoughts for the
Yeah.
most part.
See ya.
Even though we have one of them in our picks this week, which will certainly be an interesting game. So let's go ahead and move on to that. We've got our picks for a new week here in college football, and last week, oh boy, we were so close to a 5-0, 0-5. We talked about it,
We talked
that
about
it
it.
it could happen. And if you didn't see the end of the OU Missouri game, you've got to go back and watch it on YouTube. I mean, it was dumb plays. It was fumble recovery for a touchdown. It was crazy. Missouri ended up winning the game to everyone's surprise. And that got Nathaniel his lone win of the week. While I went 4-1, he went 1-4,
Hey,
giving me a cushion now.
you could say we were that close to it being 3-2, 2-3. That
That's
BYU
fair.
Utah game. I thought
Yeah.
I genuinely believed that it was going to be 2-3 after Utah went up in the second quarter. And I'm like, yeah, it's over. And I was just like kind of keeping an eye on it. But yeah, that was a brutal week. That was a brutal.
Yeah. No, I agreed with you. And it was earlier in the day we were texting of this could be 5-0
Yeah,
and
this could
5. And
be bad because the first three
some of
games,
those games were,
yeah,
yes, those were done.
yeah. Ugh.
Absolutely. But this week, we'll see. We might pick a little more of the same this week. But let's start it off with our first game in the ACC. We have number 17 Clemson going to Pitt, playing against the Panthers. Clemson's a 10-point favorite here, and you're leading us off. So who you got?
Yeah, so yeah, I'm gonna go Clemson. I'm just gonna go with the safe, easy pick. I think Clemson knows that they have a renewed new life. They after that loss last week against Louisville, or I guess 2 weeks ago now, it was okay. You're kind of now on the outside looking in. You're looking at Miami season done. Miami drops a game, new life. I think they're going to come out swinging. And I mean, they have to. If they don't, I mean, then it really is season over. I think Dabo, I will continue to say he's one of the top five coaches in college football right now, and he's going to get these guys ready to play Pittsburgh. I mean, it's at Pitt, but I mean, we've kind of seen Pitt, crumble and fall against a couple teams. So I think Clemson takes this easily.
Yeah, I agree with you. And seeing Pitt right now, they're reeling off these back-to-back losses against SMU and Virginia. Now they're playing Clemson and then following that up with going to Louisville. So we could see them losing four straight after starting the season 7-0. But I've got Clemson as well. They've got the DNA, they've got the strength there, and like you said, they have this hope of making it to the playoffs. So I'm going with Clemson as well. An interesting matchup here that we have in our second game. We have number 25 Tulane playing at Navy. And this is a game we've got to watch out for. Navy started off the year so hot, but they've been dealing with injuries Blake Horvath, their quarterback, has been dealing with this thumb injury. He's been kind of in and out of the lineup. They've dropped out of the rankings, and Tulane has vaulted all the way into the rankings at this point. It's at Navy, which is certainly good for them, and Tulane is a 6.5 point favorite in this game. I don't know a ton about the Tulane program. I know they had a bowl win a few years ago. Isn't that right, Nathaniel? I think
Oh, I don't know. My knowledge on Tulane football isn't great. 2022 is
maybe
really blurry for me for some reason.
maybe so. We can look it up later. Maybe you guys can look it up, the 2022 bowl game. But with that, I'm gonna go with Tulane, just with all the questions surrounding the midshipmen right now. I do like the way they play at Tulane, and I think it's going to be too much with Navy, especially being so one dimensional if they're dealing with problems. So I'm picking the Blue Wave.
Yeah, so
Oh wait, the Green Wave.
Green Wave, yeah.
The Green Wave. The Blue Wave is the state college back in Jacksonville. Shout out
Yeah,
FSCJ.
I had no idea what you're talking about. Yeah, so I'm gonna have to agree with you. I think Darian Mensah, the quarterback for Tulane, I think the biggest thing to come out of Tulane was that Ty Thompson transferred over, and that was supposed to be his team. And I remember just hearing all the talk about like he was supposed to be the guy at Oregon, but they had got Bo Nix, so he was gonna wait his turn. And then Dylan Gabriel came in and he just didn't have enough experience, so he was going to go somewhere and just take over the job. But freshman Darian Mensah, I got to see a little bit of their last couple games, and I mean, I think he's the real deal. He's been just absolutely slinging it. You can see just him growing each week. He takes care of the ball. Um, he's not as much of a runner like Ty Thompson is. Ty Thompson definitely has better legs and able to kind of dual thread it. But Darren Mensah can sling the ball. They're on a hot streak, and Navy is the opposite of a hot streak. They've lost two straight. So yeah, I think Tulane takes this.
Yeah, we're on the same page there. Now, BYU coming off of a scary win at Utah is back at home, taking on a Kansas team that has somehow been brought to life over the last few weeks. BYU is only a 3 point favorite over the Jayhawks in this one. Who do you have winning?
Yeah, this one's hard just because I mean it feels like Kansas is in a very similar boat to USC. Obviously they have Jalen Daniels, um, LA kid. Loved him. He's 3-star going out to Kansas. Loved the story, but just the new offense just looks so dead, especially in the beginning of the year. They took losses to UNLV and West Virginia and didn't look great. That Arizona State loss was not great, but I mean, the last 3 weeks they've looked solid. They just destroyed Houston, which isn't a great team, but they're not, bottom barrel. They took it to Kansas and, rivalry game. They got amped up. And then Iowa State, they looked great against Iowa State. And, they may be 3-6 and BYU's undefeated, but I think Kansas is going to win this game. It's at
Ooh.
BYU. I'm going to have to take some shots in the dark if I want to catch up, and this is where I'm going to take it. But Kansas, I think they've got it. I mean, they're a good team. They've been struggling at, once or twice per game. These mistakes come to bite them. I think BYU's been playing with fire just like Miami has, and I think it's going to bite them here.
Yeah, a bold pick. I was seeing the playmaking ability of Jalen Daniels always gives them a chance. Maybe not always. They lost 5 games in a row early in the season, but it gives them a chance a lot of times. But this game, I think, especially after such a narrow win against Utah, BYU is coming back home. This should not be at all a trap game. This should not be something where they're looking ahead to the next opponent. No, BYU says We are close now to being undefeated this season. Let's keep it going. I think BYU is going to come away with the victory, cover the three. I think Kansas might look a little bit like they did previously this year, playing against BYU in this game. But now, let's head to the SEC for two matchups of ranked teams. We have Missouri. They're number 24. They're traveling to number 23, South Carolina. These are two teams that are looking a lot different from each other right now. They're similar in ranking, similar in record, very different in public perception. Missouri has been struggling their way through their schedule recently, barely winning against Oklahoma last week, whereas South Carolina has caught fire and they are looking so good. Their defensive line just terrorizing quarterbacks. Lenora Sellers playing great football. They had a strong win this past week, and they're 11.5 point favorites. And I can't go away from that, especially at home playing at Williams-Brice Stadium. I have complete faith that South Carolina is going to win this game against Missouri, still with the quarterback in question at Missouri. I think it's got to be South Carolina.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, that Missouri game looked like it was so funny. We talked about how disgusting and gross that matchup looked like on paper before the game, happened. And that's exactly what happened. I think Missouri, without Brady Cook, it's tough. And I'm not too sure, that's up in the air whether he's going to play. But I mean, the drop off between him and Drew Pine is just so great. Where I think South Carolina, I honestly, with either Cook or Pine, I think South Carolina, they're just so hot right now. Their defensive line really is just full of just guys. And their offense is just so fast, so hard to contain. I think South Carolina is going to take this one. And I mean, going into next year, I mean, obviously, we're not even close to being done with this year, but this is
Sure.
a fun team looking into next
Yeah.
year.
With some youth leading them. With Sellers, one of their D linemen is a freshman over there that is playing amazing. So, man, huge game and huge future over there. And I love Shane Beamer. I love the way Beamer coaches and the way he has that program going. So, definitely, uh, it's tough with them being in the SEC East or previously the East, but I do like watching them play. They're fun. But two other former SEC East teams are playing this week. We have Georgia and Tennessee. What a rivalry that this game is, playing in Athens. And Georgia here, a 10-point favorite. A lot of that having to do with the injury situation with Nico Iamaleava, and not sure about what if he's going to be playing or how he's going to be playing. We heard positive news from Josh Heupel over the last few days. Man, who you got in this one, Nathaniel?
Yeah, I don't think there's a chance that Nico doesn't play here, just with all that's at stake. But even with that, I think this is a hard one to kind of pick and choose just because Tennessee you can see that offense is starting to heat up. That was one thing where you're kind of iffy, like, okay, is this offense they were blowing teams out in the beginning of the year. And then once they started playing SEC teams, just they were so slow. It didn't look like Nico was figuring stuff out. And I think he's starting to figure it out. We talked about the Alabama game where it just seemed like things started to click. And I mean, that offense has been on a, steady uphill climb. And Georgia's the exact opposite, where you saw some flaws in the Alabama game. You're like, okay, we can brush past that. They turned it up at the end. You saw some flaws against Mississippi State. You saw some flaws against Texas, and you're brushing and Florida too. And you're just brushing it off like, okay, Carson Beck, he's going to get it right. This is a top prospect. They've won all these games. And then that Ole Miss game just was so ugly. But and Tennessee has a good defense.
but I don't think that Kirby Smart is going to let Georgia lose two straight here. So I think Georgia takes this. I don't think they cover. I think it's going to be a dogfight pretty much the entire game, but I think
Mm.
I can see a 3-7 point win.
Yeah, this will be close. Absolutely. I am interested to see what overall um, the the play style is going to look like on both sides. We've talked a lot about the problems that Carson Beck has had just over and over again. His uh, mistakes, all the interceptions in the previous 6 games they've been playing. But looking at Nico, he's not making huge mistakes necessarily, but the huge plays that they're looking for haven't been there either. Looking at in their first 3 games of the season, they were destroying teams, of course. He had 3 touchdowns in their first game against Chattanooga. Then he had 2 against uh, North Carolina State. He had 1 against Kent State. That's 6 touchdowns in their first 3 games. Well, now at this point, they've played 6 more games and he only has 5 touchdowns. So that's really been lacking for Tennessee. And over the past few years, Georgia hadn't lost to anyone other than Alabama. And so, then they absolutely hadn't lost back-to-back games at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
So with that, coming off of a loss against Ole Miss, going back home, playing against a Tennessee team that plays a freshman, I got to pick Georgia. And for them to somehow be able to look past the mistakes they've been making to make the plays they've needed to. Also, we didn't mention Trevor Etienne is still getting back from his injury. He
Yeah.
only had 6 carries in that game
Yeah.
against Ole Miss, which was a huge problem for them. Frazier really had to take the bulk of what was going on in the running game. And even at that, they weren't able to run the ball at all against Ole Miss. So
Yeah.
if they can get him back,
They had to put
uh-huh,
ETN in a lot of times because Frazier kept fumbling the ball.
yeah. Yeah, and they don't want him in because he is not fully healthy. So difficult situation for them, but I still see Georgia being able to win this game, keeping themselves in that playoff push. And Tennessee, they've got a lot to play for. They're number 1 in the SEC right now, but I don't see them being able to win this game. So going with Georgia. And those are our picks for this week. Yeah, a lot similar other than last week. We picked 4 of them the same. But it's what we think is going to happen. We're just going with what we believe to be true. So, thanks for tuning in for another week of the Swampy Coliseum podcast. It's great to talk sports and to hear about what's going on all around the country. We've got some good games this week. Looking forward to seeing the CFP poll come out
Oh
tomorrow
yeah.
night as
Oh yeah.
well.
It'll be really
We'll be
interesting.
posting about that. Remember, follow us on Instagram, YouTube, Spotify. You can listen, you can watch, you can see everything we have going on. So thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you all again next week. See ya.
See ya.